was, uh, I was reading a story this week, getting ready for the sermon, about a preacher who went to a mission trip to India. He had never been to India, and their church, we do too, we support a missionary in India, and this preacher had never been to India, had never seen the mission, never seen that part of the world, and he was just amazed by how different it was. I mean, on the one hand, people are people pretty much all over the world, but there's so many cultural differences in India compared to here, and you're just constantly aware when you're walking through the streets, when you're in the car driving down the road, you're just constantly aware you're not home, you're not in America, that everything looks so different. And there were a lot of things that made that powerful for this. The preacher was talking about a lot of things that made that powerful. But one of the things was there's just so many religious sites in India. Now, in America, of course, it feels like there's a church on every street too. But India, I mean, there's hundreds of thousands, millions of little temples and shrines, and they're just everywhere. And Hinduism as a faith looks at thousands of different gods. You know, maybe by one estimate, millions of different gods, different variations of different things that are all worshipped over there. And there's shrines and temples and holy sites for all of them, and you just can't hardly escape it. And he didn't want to say anything. You know, if you ever go on a mission trip to a different culture, you don't want to comment about the things you find peculiar, because, I mean, they don't find it peculiar, and you don't want to offend accidentally. And so he doesn't say anything. And they start talking about other things, and the missionary and his wife bring up America. And they had been to America. And the preacher thought, well, this is my chance to kind of find out, you know, what they thought. What'd you think? You know, what'd you think of America? And it was funny. They said a lot of the same things he would have said the other way. You know, just felt different all the time, and everything felt so. You know, just everywhere I was aware that I wasn't home. But she says, the missionary's wife, I don't think I could go back to America. There's just so much idolatry there. And it was such a weird thing to hear say. The preacher talked about, and then he did have the conversation with them. You know, it just seems a weird thing for you to say. I mean, everywhere I look, there's different things here to talk about the different gods and goddesses and all that, and then you say that America has idolatry. And they have this long conversation. And what occurred to him eventually, and what would occur to you probably too if you thought about it, or me, is that we have a really hard time sometimes seeing our own idols. It's very easy for us to see the things that knock other people around, but it's very hard sometimes to see our own sin. You see that all the time. It's illustrated most powerfully in a marriage. A husband and wife are arguing about something, and it could be anything. It doesn't really matter. They're late to an appointment, and it really is bothering one of them a lot. Let's say it's the husband, and he's really bothered by how late they are, and so he helpfully says, you know, maybe if you started a little earlier getting ready, we wouldn't be late to these sorts of things, trying to be helpful. And she responds, well, maybe if you help me a little bit with all the things that have to get done before we leave, I wouldn't have to take as long to do it. And she's also trying to be helpful. And the weird thing is that as the conversation escalates, it's very easy for each of them to see what the other one did wrong. Now, when they're accused in the marriage, hey, you know, if you'd have helped me a little bit, as a husband who does like to sit on the recliner, I think to myself, well, that's true. You know, I could have done that. But I don't want to admit it. So what I'll do is I'll bring it back to her somehow. Well, maybe I would have helped more if you weren't so critical or whatever. You know, it's very easy, instead of admitting your own problem, to defend yourself, or to excuse yourself, or maybe even to protect the stuff that you enjoy. Very easy for me to see the sin in someone else. Very hard for me to see the sin or idolatry in myself. And that's something as a Christian, especially if you're serious about being a Christian, that you ought to think about. It's the kind of thing that ought to occur to you sometimes. I do believe that human beings are designed to worship. I think it's in our nature to worship. And I think it's very easy for us to worship, whether it be in church or something else. I think if an alien came to Earth and they didn't know much about our species, and they're trying to study us, and they went to a big ball game or to a concert of some sort or a political rally, they might think that all those things were worship. They might not be able to understand from a distance what we were doing. And if they challenged us, if an alien came down and challenged us on that, looks like you're worshiping. the team or the singer or the politician. Looks like it's worship. Oh, no, you'd say. And you'd try to explain how that's totally different than worship. And I think it is, sort of. But there's something in us that's designed that way. I don't know what it is. There's just some hook in us that makes it very easy for us to get distracted, to put people or things or stuff on a pedestal that only God should be on. And if we don't watch out, sometimes those things can really knock us around. And so today, we're going through the Ten Commandments, and today, when I want to look at the second commandment, I think it's very easy for modern audiences to think, well, this doesn't really apply to me. Now let's just look at it, and then we'll talk about it here in a second. The second commandment, first commandment is, you'll have no other gods but me. The second commandment in the Ten Commandments is this one. He says, you shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or in the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them. And this is really more the issue. I don't think God's against art. And in fact, when he says don't make an image, he'll later tell them to make image. Like in the temple, they'll carve flowers and different designs into the temple. He gives very specific instructions about the art that he wants. God's not against art. The art that he's against, talking to these guys, is don't build something for the purpose of bowing down to it and worshiping it. And then he gives the motivations and the reasons. He says, because I, Lord your God, am a jealous God. And when you think about jealous can be used a couple different ways, and it certainly can be used a sinful sort of way, where somebody doesn't let their husband or wife even leave their sight without being nervous. He's not using it in that sense. It's just that God wants to be exclusive. And so if you're going to make a relationship with God, then he intends to be your only major relationship. And he doesn't want you to set up these idols that might creep in and steal your affection. He says, I'm going to, and I want to talk about this later in the sermon. I'm going to tell you about it and we'll come back. For this sin of idolatry, he lists out a punishment. And I think that the punishment here probably is a punishment that goes to all sin. I think sin has a way of lingering here. And I think sin is its own punishment. When you allow yourself to get dug deep into sin, it has a way of moving on. And we see this with addiction, and we see this with anger, and we see this with pride or different. A parent can be a real mess, and then before you know it, the kid is the exact same kind of mess. And his kids are exact same kind of mess. And we can see sin chase the children down 3 or 4 generations. And that's what he says here on the slide behind me. But he says, but I'm going to show love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. So it can be pretty bad. Sin can have a way of lingering. But if you make a decision, he says, to follow God, the blessings of that's also going to pass down to your children and your children's children. And it's going to continue to lift them up and take them someplace long time after he says, you've ceased to be. And I want to talk about that 3rd and 4th generation and 1,000 generation stuff, but I want to focus first on the other thing. So if I can skip back here, I don't want you to bow down and worship, he says, any idols. The biggest Old Testament, if you think about New Testament, what's a symbol of Jesus in the New Testament? You know, as a Christian, what's our symbols for Jesus? And the big one, of course, is the cross behind me there. That's when you see the cross, you think, okay, well, there you go. That's the symbol. And for the early Christians, a fish became the symbol for a couple reasons. For Jesus, it became a symbol of Jesus because they were all fishermen, the disciples. But the Greek word for fish is ichthus, and if you make an acronym out of that, all the different letters, it can be Jesus Christ, Lord and Savior, or God and Savior. Jesus Christ, God and Savior. And so they would take that idea, ichthus, and a fish, and the fish symbolized Jesus. And it was an easy mark, the fish or the cross, to symbolize who you were worshiping. Early Christians, and the Catholic Church still does this, would make the sign of the cross. You know, they'd make the sign of the cross. And again, it was a very easy way to let someone else know, this is where I stand. And they would know it quickly. They would just, when they saw you, you could say, okay, this is where. But in the Old Testament, we don't really see that sort of thing. And it's mostly because of this commandment. The biggest symbol in the Old Testament for God is an empty chair. It was the ark. And the same way a king would be carried on a litter, that's what the ark was. God was seated between the angels on the top, he says, and the priests would carry this empty chair. And the idea that God was so big and so majestic and so powerful and so omnipresent and omniscient that there's just no idol that's going to capture the image of that. And anything you do to try to capture the image of that God, you're going to fall short. And so he was symbolized most effectively by the throne. And you were just to think about him being on the throne and I guess let your mind chase all the possibilities at the same time. As an illustration of that thing, called some friends in California, and I had them send me a little bit of the Pacific Ocean. I've had some people tell me that they don't feel like summer's really started until they put their feet in the ocean. So if anybody wants to come up after service, you'll have to do it 1 foot at a time, but you could do that today. We could set you up. As somebody told me when I was talking about doing this, that one of the things they really hope one day before they die is to see the Pacific Ocean. If that's you, you can rest easy. There it is. And of course that's silly because there's no way that's the ocean, right? I mean, the whole experience of seeing the ocean is not just seeing the water. It's feeling the breeze. It's having the sand. It's hearing it. You know, it's hearing the ocean. It's imagining how it's looking at the horizon and seeing nothing but water and being aware of how small you are and how big this world is, and it's the majesty of it. It's not just the water. And any attempt to take the ocean and reduce it to something like this is, well, it's crazy, right? It's silly. And I think that's what this commandment's about. Any sort of an idol we can make for God is going to reduce him. Any sort of impression or image of God that we can make is just going to limit what he's about. And it really is only through Jesus that you can get a smaller picture of the bigger God. Jesus is the image of the invisible God. Jesus comes and we can see what God looks like with skin on. But the Father and God, I don't think you'll ever get there. I think one day you'll get to heaven and you still won't be a God. And he'll still be light years ahead of you. And when we've been there 10,000 years, we'll be singing about his amazing grace, but we'll also still not be God. For the rest of eternity, he's going to be further than us. He's going to be bigger than us. There's just nothing else worthy of worship, and any idol we do is going to limit him. C.S. Lewis had an article, or one of his chapters in his book, where he talked about God will keep giving you an impression of him, and then eventually God will break that impression because he's bigger than that. When I first became a Christian, I saw God as the man upstairs, maybe, you know. I could talk to him and he would help me with things. And then God breaks that impression. So he doesn't always help me like I want him to. He doesn't always fix it the way I think would be best. And sometimes I would see God as somebody who's pretty strict in heaven, really intense and hard. And then God would break that because he'd give me people at just the right time, or give me a situation at just the right moment, lead me to some place that was just the right place for me. God continues to give me an impression of him and then continues to show me that he's even bigger than that impression. And I fully expect that to continue the rest of my life, and maybe on even into eternity. He's just going to be bigger and stronger than me. Now, through Jesus, of course, we can see some little bit of that. We can see Jesus as a go-between between us and God. There's one God and there's one mediator for us, and that's Jesus. Jesus is able to represent and explain God to us and help us to understand who he is and what he's about and figure those sorts of things out. But I wonder if even with Jesus, you're getting. God's still so big. And I don't want to get into a weird theological thing here, but I think the church spends its whole existence trying to manifest and follow Jesus and understand how big all this is. The Big Ten Commandments were a covenant. It's what it was like to be free. And God expects us to be free of anything else that's going to diminish us and diminish Him. He wants us to keep trying to seek Him and know Him and understand Him. That's where freedom is. And there's going to be 1,000 little shortcuts that we can take that we will think will give us the solution that we want. 1,000 little shortcuts. Some of them are as easy as television or the phone in your pocket. Some of them are a little more complex. A little addiction to one thing or another, or a relationship that might take you the wrong direction. Jesus says all these little distractions, He says they're slavery. He says anyone who sins is a slave to that sin. And we're just called to something bigger, harder, but better. Now, I don't think anybody on purpose chooses slavery. I mean, I don't think there's ever any little kid who says, when I get big, I want to be an alcoholic. Or when I get big, I'd like to have a codependent relationship. I mean, no kid thinks that way, right? No kid hopes that when they grow up that they'll find some sort of an idol, some sort of a crutch with which they can't live their life any longer. Nobody wants that. But it happens, and it happens often. And it's worth thinking about, we who are designed to worship, why we keep doing that. Why we keep settling for less than the big thing. And I think there's 3 or 4 reasons. I think we'd like to be in control. I think we'd like to be in control. I do. How many of you really have a hard time riding in a car? I do. I like to drive. I like to drive. Am I the best driver in the world? No, almost certainly not. But I like to be in control of it. I like to be the one making the decisions. Even when I'm with a good driver, I find myself grabbing the door and being nervous that we're making bad choices. I like to think that if I can control it, then it'll go the way that I want to go. And sometimes those little side aisles I get into, I do it for that reason. Sometimes I do it because I like to manipulate. I had a conversation with one of my elders talking about manipulating, and we don't know that we do it, But I can subtly try to twist people to get them to do what I want them to do. Little guilt trips here, or little, and I think again I do it for control. Sometimes I want to do it because I want the benefits of somebody looking out for me without any of the real responsibility. I mentioned this in that video, if you saw it this week on social media. I was watching late night television once. I used to have a really hard time going to sleep. It's not a problem anymore. I can nap right now if I needed to, but I used to have a really hard time going to sleep. And I'd be up at 1 or 2 in the morning. And in the old days, way back when, television offerings got pretty thin in the early morning hours. It was really hard to find some, and a lot of infomercials. And I'm watching television late, and I'm reading, and television's eyes couldn't get to sleep. And this commercial comes on for Jesus the doll, and it's like this little plush Jesus, and it's got little nail scarred hands. And you could take Jesus the doll and hold on to that. If you're having a hard time getting to sleep or a hard time, and machine washable. And if you were Jewish, they had a little Moses the doll that you could get too. You didn't have to go with Jesus the doll. They had a second option. And maybe, I guess, if it really taken off, there'd be lots of options. And of course, the benefit of Jesus the doll is if I need it, I'll pull it out of the drawer and I'll use it. And then when I'm tired of it, I'll put it back in the drawer. I'll do whatever I want. I think that's always the benefit of an idol. Again, that I can control it. And so when we think about this second commandment, I want to be careful with all of us that you don't start to assume, well, that really doesn't apply to me. I mean, I know there were people who used to worship idols, but I've lived my whole life without putting anything on a stand and worshiping it. But I think worship's more subtle than that. It's anything that eats up all your attention and your time and your worry. It's anything that you look to for your security or your sense of self, your identity. Any of those things that you put there Tim Keller, I mentioned this last week. He says an idol is anything that's more important to you than God, that absorbs your heart and imagination more than God, anything that you seek to give you what only God can give. Anything that you ask to give you what only God can give. That's an idol. And by that standard, I think you could look at things like fame and your reputation. Are enough people voting for you or liking your posts? You could look at your money. I heard a guy say once that he didn't think he needed to keep working, but that's how we keep score, isn't it? Or something to that effect. And I thought that was perverse but wise. I think that is how people think. I think that's how most people think. We can make success our deal, and our title and our rank. Our comfort can be our idol. We don't want anything to disrupt our perfectly laid plans for ourselves. Power can be that, certainly sex or the different things we get addicted to. And we can put these things on such a pedestal, and they can become more important to us than anything else. Even good things, even things that would in any other circumstance be a good thing, can become too important. You can put family as an idol and have this perfect image of your house, this perfect image of how everything's going, and make all your identity about the idea that you're the leader of a perfect family. What's wrong with that plan? Well, they're not perfect, right? And sooner or later, one of them will screw up. And maybe they'll do that public. Maybe they'll do it private, and your whole family can wrestle with that. And so you've got this Facebook image of the family that you're trying to promote, and then you've got what it really is. Our career is certainly a good thing, but it can become way too important. It can become the only thing that you care about. And you're willing to put things like God and his hopes for this world on the back burner. Job has to come first. As a Christian, sometimes a person might say, and actually I've heard Christians say it, I know that maybe I ought to give this guy a break or do, but this is business. As if that makes sense. That you can put on your Christian hat occasionally and then take it off when it's just business. Like Jesus the doll. If I need it, I'll have it. But if I don't, I'll put him in the drawer until I need him again. And there's nothing wrong with career or family or your health. Certainly to prioritize your health's a good thing. I mean, that's a wonderful thing to say, my identity is wrapped up in this, how much I can run or lift or how in shape I am. But your body is just made of dust and ashes. We're just made out of meat. I mean, sooner or later, all these other things that we define ourselves by, they just can't satisfy like God can. My favorite verse, the only memory verse really I have in the book of Jeremiah is this one. He says, God talking to Jeremiah, he says, my people, talking about Israel, God says to Jeremiah, my people have committed two sins. They've forsaken me, he says, I'm the spring of living water, but then they've dug their own cisterns, and they're broken cisterns that can't hold water. I think that's really evocative, and I think it's how a lot of people live. I mean, not only do they reject God, who really could take them where they want to go, I mean, you just can't ever get to the depths of God. And the deeper you dig into him, the more you're going to find. There's just never a time. Now, you can be disappointed in the church, for sure. You can be disappointed in other Christians. That happens all the time. But you will never get to the end of God. And he's always going to satisfy, and he's always going to help you find joy and hope and purpose. But instead of that, sometimes we put God in there and all his demands and all of his requirements. We put him over here, and we'll just live our lives until we need him again. And all those other things, sooner or later, aren't going to take you where you want to go. In the Old Testament, God gives these 10 commandments. They're on Mount Sinai. And the very first thing he does is give them the 10 commandments. These are the 10 big things that I want you to think about. These are the 10 big things that define, he says, our relationship. And Moses delivers that. The people hear the 10 commandments. They hear the 10 words from God These are the most important things that you need to do. And then Moses goes back up on the mountain, and he's there for 40 days. And God delivers all of the, God is setting up a nation through Moses. This is how you're going to live. This is how you're going to structure yourselves. This is how you're going to go. And there's 40 days of instruction that God has given to Moses, and he's on the mountain. It says that while God's on the mountain, he's thundering up there, and it's intense. The people, when they first see it, they're so scared that they don't want to leave their tents. Right? They're all in their tents around the mountain. God's up there thundering, lightning, and it's loud and it's intense. And the people don't even want to come close. But he's up there for 40 days. And they gradually come out of their tents. And they start to live life like you do. You know? And all that's going on in the background. You just get used to it. I grew up on a farm, and when we started picking corn, the fans on the grain bins just ran all the time. And at first, man, you were so aware of it, you know. If one of them didn't have a perfect hum to it, you'd have a hard time getting to sleep at night because you just hear that roar all the time. But after a few days, I mean, you don't even notice it anymore. And you're talking to your brother, "How you doing?" you say, but you don't even realize that you're doing that because it's just, you know, it's what you do. You just get used to it. It's crazy and loud, and one of our kids had a friend come down from IU and spend the weekend with us, and they said it was hard to get to sleep here because it was so quiet in our house. They were used to the noise, and you get used to it, whatever it is, and the people get used to it. God's up there thundering around, and they get used to it, and eventually they get frustrated by it in the 40 days, you know. This God and all of his instruction, this sounds pretty hard. Why don't we do something else? And they kind of start bouncing this off of each other, and it becomes a movement. And they go to Aaron. He's in charge of everything while Moses is away. And they say, what if we make our own idol? And we'll say that's God. We'll say that's Yahweh. And Moses said, well, give me your gold earrings. And they all give him the gold earrings they have. And he makes a golden calf. And that probably alludes to an Egyptian-looking idol. Probably they had calf idols in Egypt. And so probably alludes to an Egyptian-looking idol. Baal sometimes would be, in Canaan, would be celebrated by a bull. And so it might have that in mind. But either way, it was an idol that was common. A lot of other nations had bulls or calves as an idol. And so they make a golden calf. But he introduces it like it's God. Like when he puts it in front of the people, Aaron says, look, this is your God who took you out of Egypt. He uses the same language he would use to talk about the invisible. This is the ocean, he says. You know, you don't have to go to the ocean. Here it is. Or it's like this is Jesus the doll, you know. You don't have, you can, and he says, this is your gods, he says. And what's the hook of that? Well, the golden calf doesn't say anything, you know. And if I need it, there it is. I can pray to it. And if I don't need it, I'll put it in a tent somewhere, and I won't think about it. And I'll live however the hell I want. And I mean that literally, right? And that's what they start doing. They start drinking, and they start carousing. Carousing's almost certainly a sexual immorality word. They start carousing. And Moses is up on the mountain. And God says, we're done. You know, it's only been 40 days, and they've already broken commandment 1 and 2. I mean, we've not even, and he says, I'm done. They don't want it. God says they don't want it. And so, and Moses pleads with God not to destroy them. Don't give up on them, God. And it's kind of an interesting thing to look up. It's Exodus 32. You can look it up later. It's kind of an interesting story back and forth. And Moses goes down, and halfway down the mountain, Joshua's there, and he's like his assistant. And they go a little further down. They're almost to the camp. And Joshua says, I hear noise. Sounds like it's a fight. There's fighting in the camp. And Moses says, it's not fighting. It's dancing that you're hearing. And he gets down there, and they're drunk, and they're stupid, and a big, ugly moment. And it's like the whole thing, at the very beginning, we see this quality in people. Not just in them, in us. It's just really hard to keep God first. And so as we finish up here, I want to think about what your IQ is here, your idolatry quotient. You know, how much idolatry do you allow? And these are the three questions to reflect on as we leave. I mean, what gives you your sense of security? You know, what is it that makes you that you're so proud of? You know, those things have a way of being more fragile than you'd like to pretend. What gives you your sense of identity? You know, not only what's going to take care of you, but what makes you important? What takes up the most of your time and your talent and your treasure? And again, there's nothing wrong with having hobbies. Nothing wrong with getting your kids involved in different things. There's nothing wrong with big, elaborate trips and vacations. There's nothing wrong with any of that. There's certainly going to be seasons where your money is going to get focused in a weird way. And I'm not judging that, and that's not what I'm talking about. But when you look at your life, what's the priority? You know, what thing, if you lost it, would just be, and again, these aren't necessarily bad things, but they're the kind of things you ought to test yourself with occasionally. Not to give up everything else, but just to make sure that something's not creeping into that place where only God should be. I believe that the cure to a broken marriage, to a broken parenthood, to a broken life is God. I mean, I just really believe it. I talk to people all the time who I've tried everything else. Well, have you tried this? And it's God that can bring you back. We spent a week at camp talking about joy, and joy is just hope that God's going to change things, because God ultimately can change things. And with all that in mind, I want to go back to that generation thing. This will be the last thing I talk about. With all that in mind, God says the people who disobey me on this are going to be punished to the third and fourth generation. Some of you know exactly what that feels like. You're angry, or you're mean, or you're addicted, or you're stupid, just like your parents were, or just like their parents were, or just like their parents were. I mean, you can see the thread. And maybe even as a kid, you say, well, when I get to be an adult, have my own house, I'm never doing that. And then you're doing that, right? And you see the sin of the parents chasing down through the generations. You're living it. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And I would be, when I say some of you, I mean like 90% of you. You know what that's about. And the 10% who can't think of what it is right now, it'll come to you later this week. But God says the ones who come to me, I'm going to bless for 1,000 generations. If I were to ask you who your great-great-grandfather was, you might have a hard time thinking of the name. It doesn't take very many generations before you'll be forgotten. And that's a sad, ugly truth, but it's just the truth. But God says there's going to be this turn in the family chain where one person makes this decision to turn to God. And it's a picture of a family sitting around the fireplace way off in the future, long after you're in the ground. And they're talking about the family. You know, we were a mess. I mean, our family, just this thing and that thing and that thing and this thing. But then when Papa turned it around. Remember when Grandma finally, that's the one who turned us around. And that's the one who got serious. And that's what he's talking about. And that picture of your kids' kids having a better life because you finally got serious about turning back to God. I believe that 100%. And so every week at the end of the service, we offer people a chance if they want to take that step towards God, take that step towards hope or towards joy. We want to offer it every week. If you have a broken life, if you've been trying to drink out of a broken well, you can turn back to God, and you can find hope there. And I want to always make that available to people. So at the end of the service, if anybody needs to be prayed for, to be lifted up, to be just whatever, know you can come forward. And we'll pray for you, and we'll ask God to move in your life real powerful. If there's anybody here who wants to make a decision to give their heart to Christ, I want to go that direction, then know that you can make that decision today, and we'll help you get started. Stand up with me. Let me pray for you. Dear Lord God, I thank you for this group. I pray, Father, for them as we end our service time here together, as we end our worship, our hour every week that we spend. God, after this 1 hour, there's going to be 100 hours between this and next time. Now, if the only taste of you I'm going to get is at this hour, I'm going to be thirsty before too long. So I pray, God, that you use this time to build in me a thirst that helps me keep seeking you, to keep calling out to you, to keep reading and trying to understand you, to keep praying to you. God, I believe you are the spring that doesn't run dry. And help me, God, to find hope there in you. In Christ's name, amen.